So we'll see how far we get. But yes, this is the program on due diligence. And I think before we get started, I just want to check with all of you. With a show of hands, if you are with an organization or if your work involves conducting due diligence in the sector of one kind or another, whether it's as an impact investor or a venture philanthropist or something else, how about a show of hands? Okay, very interesting. Now, if you work with an organization that has ever or maybe regularly has due diligence conducted on it, and you're the subject of due diligence, raise your other hand. Okay. And if you do both, if you're both a conductor and a conductee, raise both hands. Yeah. Yeah, my organization is like that too, so that's where we are. So, so the first thing we learn here is that there's actually quite a lot of experience and expertise in the room, right? And I think, this is a session, we have like an hour for this. So I think the best way for us to use this hour is to get into a conversation among all of us, and to give and take about what works, what are the issues, what are the challenges. And we have a great panel with us, whom you'll hear from shortly. All of whom have also extensive experience and are deeply involved in one or both sides of this equation. And all of whom suggested to me that they don't really want to approach this as the experts. They don't want to sit up in the panel and say, we're the experts and we're going to share with you how to do due diligence. What we found in our preparation for the session is that it's very easy for us to see that due diligence and how you conduct due diligence depends very much on the kind of organization you're running and what you're trying to achieve. So therefore, there isn't a single model for how due diligence is to be conducted, and for what that even means. And therefore, it's really more of a sharing about how each of us goes about this sometimes difficult, sometimes thorny process in the context of our own work. Just to help set the context a little bit, I'll speak very briefly about the organization that I work with, which is Ashoka, and what due diligence looks like for us. And again, we've reached a milestone. Ashoka has just reached the milestone where we've hit the $100 million mark, which means that we have put $100 million over the life of the organization into the hands of social entrepreneurs around the world. That's the good news. The bad news is it took us 30 years to get there. So when you start doing the division, it's not quite that impressive, actually. But it's been a good learning experience. And for us, due diligence is very, very closely linked to what it is we're trying to achieve as an organization. Which is various things, but as far as the social entrepreneurs go, it really means helping to create an identity for social entrepreneurs, helping social entrepreneurs to develop their role in the world and bringing in other elements of society, whether it's business or whether it's investors or whether it's foundations or just citizens, to really recognize and understand the important role that social entrepreneurs can play. So the way we conduct our due diligence very much has to do with understanding, who we're talking to, what they're trying to achieve, and what their vision is. It's not primarily about a financial transaction with Ashoka, and therefore the kind of due diligence that we undertake is more on the personal side, right? So an organization that's doing impact investing is very interested in looking at the balance sheet. Ashoka, which is interested in something else, we interview people about their grandparents, right? It's a different approach because we have different goals. Now, I asked you to raise your hands each a little while ago, and I should warn you that after the panelists have a chance to talk about their work, we have some questions for you all as well. So the Q&A might flow both ways. So you can start, as you listen to the panelists speak, you can start thinking about what due diligence means in the context of your work, what your questions and challenges are, and therefore be ready to jump in to the conversation as we get going. let me introduce our first panelist. I'm just going to do this from left to right. My left. Let's see, my left to that right. So I think some of you have already met Audrey. Audrey worked with ARTA, or the project is ARTA, is that right? Yeah. Which is developing a platform for the sharing of due diligence and looking at the sector-wide issue of due diligence. So would you like to share a little bit about what due diligence looks like in the context of your work?
Sure.
Okay, here you go.
Thanks, Chris. So, as some of you may know, I've met some of you. The organization for which I work is called Rianta. So Rianta is an investment advisory to a family trust. And to the Singh family in particular, Tom Singh is the founder of New Look in the UK. So he's a retail entrepreneur and decided in 2006 that he really wanted to support entrepreneurship in India in agriculture, energy, water, and livelihoods. And since that time, we've been working to trying to develop a portfolio of impact investments in India. And I had not had a lot of experience coming into this portfolio development role, and quickly realized that due diligence is really awful. And it's aside from the problems of originating deals. I remember when I had been working as a consultant I used to work for PwC in New York City, and when I in management consulting, and that was the first time I ever heard the words due and diligence together. And I remember the chills that ran down my spine when I first heard that terminology. And then I realized what it is in practice and how difficult it is. And in effect, what started to come out over the course of finding interesting deals that we thought were unique, which really were not, which every other investor was also looking at, was the fact that in effect, when 4 or 5 of us are looking at any given deal and not talking to each other and not coordinating, the unit economics of these transactions fails almost immediately, to the point where over the course of anywhere from, well, depending on your effectiveness, I suppose, but anywhere from 3 to 18 months as a process of due diligence on a social enterprise, where due diligence actually becomes a biz dev process. In the act of asking questions, you're actually helping to formulate business strategy sometimes with these entrepreneurs, again, depending on their stage. As you're going through all of this process, the costs of this rise very, very quickly. And so at the end of the day, if you spent 50 grand as a group, not talking to each other, but if you really add it up, you start spending lots and lots of money to invest 50 grand, you realize you're doing something wrong. And so our goal is to facilitate the syndication of the investment appraisal process, as well as the investment itself, based on the premise that we can coordinate, even if we are looking at financial returns. Again, this is small to smaller end of the deal spectrum. So if you're looking at stuff over $1 million, and you're not doing direct equity, and there's a number of different conditions in that. But if that is in effect what you're looking at, it probably does make sense to share, and at least to have some visibility on your portfolio, so that others don't have to necessarily call you up or email you or bump into you at a conference to find out what you're looking at. And so that was the idea of the birth of the ARTA platform. And we've built and rebuilt it based on user feedback. Some of you have seen the inside of it and have forgiven us and still continue to talk to us. It's now, I think, quite nicely improved, and we've done a couple of transactions through it. And one of the other premises of the functionality that we've built is that we should be outsourcing the due diligence to third parties in country. In India, we work only in India, and there really doesn't need to be a whole influx of external consultants from Washington, D.C., Zurich, and London flying to India to tell us what's going on with Indian businesses. And so our premise is that the third parties that we've identified in country, we have about 25 of them, so it's not many, but each of them now at this point, if a due diligence process is initiated by an investor, they get an inbox, they get an email in their inbox, and they can bid on the work. And in effect, we're indirectly also supporting the emergence of a small marketplace of service providers who I think will probably be in the long term more sustainable as a network than, with all due respect, people like ourselves and the big DFIs who like to fly around the world. So that's the premise of the ARTA platform. We have not that many transactions under our belts. We have about 10 in 6 years. But we're working on now trying to speed that process up a little bit through the context of a venture challenge. So we launched the Artha Venture Challenge at SoundCloud a couple of weeks ago. And we're hoping that through that process and the idea of holding a pot as matched funds, so the winners of this business plan competition, once they find an investor, we will match that investment to the tune of $50K for each one. So there's going to be a lot of, it's a big experiment, there's going to be a lot of, nice big gaps to fall into and all kinds of mistakes to be made, but we're going to try that and ideally work in as close a partnership as possible with the local organizations to make this successful if we can. So that's a summary of what we're working on. Thank you.
Simon, in transition, I think what we hear Audrey saying is that her organization is actually involved in something which is aimed at improving and creating infrastructure for the whole sector, not just performing a function for one, for your own organization, but trying to address the sector-wide issue of the lack of coordination and the inefficiencies that come about, right? In when every organization tries to do its own due diligence and invest in that. Let's move over to our next panelist, Simon from Shell Foundation. And Simon, I'm very interested to know. We have a small Audrey represents a small organization doing a lot for the whole sector. You're attached to a fairly large organization. So what do these due diligence issues look like to you?
I'm glad you didn't complete that opposite. Yeah, some of you might be wondering, why is a foundation sitting on a panel talking about due diligence? I run the Access to Energy program for the Shell Foundation. Now, just 2 lines on the foundation, and I'll just talk about what I'm interested in terms of due diligence. The Shell Foundation basically helps take seed stage energy enterprises that are typically for-profit and help them get from a blueprint or inception phase to validate their technology or their model, to help prepare them for scale, and to help actually help them reach scale. Our partnerships are few and far between, but they run deep. So our partnerships tend to last 5 to 10 years, and they tend to run millions of dollars. And we deploy grant as an instrument, which makes it a little bit different in a very careful way, a non-distortive use of grant funding or smart subsidy. So we're never subsidizing the price of the end product or service. We're helping to build capacity of an organization that is at a point where it is so risky and so new that it is unable to attract funding from the capital markets. And then further up the chain, we help shift the way we deploy grant, where there are investors involved, to help a company build sort of strategic areas that they need to build to enable them to achieve scale. So R&D, training, human capital, that kind of thing. A few things I'm interested in from a foundation perspective on diligence is usually at the stage that we look at businesses, there isn't much to audit. There aren't many financials. We can't go back into audited financials. We can't go back 5 years and look at historical track record. Often the sweet spot is for us are teams that come to us with a new idea. Maybe they have an initial customer. They're probably pre-revenue, or they're maybe just a little bit post-revenue. So for us, the issue is the diligence process has to do with the team itself. So first thing we would look at, and I'm interested to hear from you. I don't know how interesting this is for anybody here who might not be from a foundation perspective, but there's something around skin in the game. When an enterprise comes to us for a grant, more often than not, I would say probably 8 times out of 10, it's I'm not going to put up any of my own capital, but I would like a significant grant to help test my business. So basically, there's this risk imbalance that is hugely at play. Some people don't have any money to contribute. So for us, skin in the game is more than just capital. It might be I have given up a $250,000 a year job to go and do this, and I'm going to put everything I have into it, and I'm going to move to the country in which I'm operating. To us, that's as skin in the game as somebody putting in a $100,000 check. It's relative to where they're coming from. There's a skin in the game issue. The other issue is sort of who are these people, right? Whose skin is it? And we just started talking about that. For those of you who were in the session before about financial inclusion, we just started talking about how do you conduct a check on the actual individual? How do you know and this was more from a credit worthiness perspective, and I love the idea of actually starting to use social media to do that more. And this is kind of an idea that might sound far out there right now, but increasingly, and I'm thinking not just from a diligence perspective on potential new partners for us, but potential hires for our partner companies, and for example, some of the businesses that we have helped set up, which give loans to businesses, how are they conducting diligence? The power of a tool like a LinkedIn or a Facebook is actually, it stops being kind of a cute thing and actually starts becoming real. How many first degree connections do I have to this individual who's coming at me? Because we're taking a risk. Everybody here knows, if anybody who's done diligence knows, your numbers in a business plan will not be met. That business plan is, to me, just an indication of how much thought has gone into a business as opposed to what numbers are going to be met. So it's basically who is behind that plan. So we do a lot of my diligence work is actually diligencing an individual and asking 20 people in the network, give me the dirt. And often I'll take that person to a bar and give them 4 beers and then ask them the same question. I find that the truth often comes out, when some people...
I thought I was the only one who did that.
Yeah, share that trade secret. Third thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, is that this whole notion of, and Chris, you mentioned we're going to start asking you questions. Of our potential partners, I would ask, what questions do you have for us? Because more often than not, again, 8 times out of 10, they will see us as a walking checkbook, and they care about our cash, and they care about slapping our brand on their website, and that's about it. The ones that our strategic partners understand that we have a heck of a lot more than that to offer, and are asking intelligent questions, not about when can we get some money, but how do we actually build a partnership where we are able to provide much more than money to the folks that we support, which is core to our model. So there's something about the intelligence of the questions that are coming back to us, and often we even get blank stares. What questions do you have for us? And I'll just get we're good. When is the investment committee meeting? It's pretty shocking. So I think there's something around what is that interaction, what does that partnership actually look like beyond the check there.
Okay, thanks for that. And I think one of the takeaways there is beers on Simon tonight.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to Shruti Sarah from New Profit. I've heard you describe due diligence as much of an art as a science, and that the analytical element needs also to be matched by a certain kind of insight and judgment. So take us through what due diligence looks like in terms of in the context of New Profit's vision.
Sure, thank you. So at New Profit, just to give you the one-liner on who we are, we fund largely nonprofit organizations in the U.S. When they have already kind of created their model. So if you think about that blueprint to scale framework that was shown earlier this morning, we fund organizations when they start to move into that validate and prepare for scale phase. And our goal is we want to make as many large demonstration points as we can help foster in the U.S., but we're working in those two steps of the process. And we're looking at organizations who are working in social mobility, so education, workforce development, poverty alleviation, and public health. So as far as diligence goes, our process and our model for impact with organizations is a very intense model. So when we engage with an organization, we're typically giving about a day a week of senior staff time to that organization. No partner at New Profit has more than 4 organizations that they support. Typically, we're looking at 3 per senior level individual at New Profit. So it's a very intense engagement process. A lot of strategic management support, and we strive to become the most trusted advisor to the social entrepreneur, so that the moment that they hit a bump in the road, we're the first call that they make in the middle of Sunday evening. As they're getting ready to face what's going to happen on Monday morning. So we've geared our diligence process to prepare for that. Our diligence process is fairly intense. It's about a 6-month process. It starts out with talking to lots of organizations, probably about 300 to 400 organizations that we speak to every year. And we look at all of those conversations as advisory conversations. So whether or not we invest in organizations, we're trying to help build the field as part of that process. We very quickly start to narrow it down When we get to the last few organizations that we actually conduct intensive due diligence with, there's a set of guiding principles. So one of them is that, while there is some science to this process, we do have investment criteria and a set of things that we're aiming for, and we have some pattern recognition. This is a lot more of an art than a science, and it does take a lot of judgment, not just from a single individual, but we put organizations. So if I'm leading diligence on an organization, I am constantly reporting back to other partners at New Profit and getting their insights and input to feed my process and to push my thinking in different ways than what I'm seeing in that moment. We look at diligence, we look at our organizations as knowing more about their fields than we ever will. So these are people who are working day in and day out on a specific topic. We've got this broad umbrella of social mobility. So essentially, we look at our social entrepreneurs as the experts. We're not trying to tell them what to do. We're just trying to think and learn how they think. And our specific area of knowledge is around how to scale. So it's a different thing. It's not about their topic area. And we want every single conversation we have with an organization to be additive to the organization. So when we're having a deep dive conversation into an organization's plan for systemic change, we want that to be pushing their thinking so that they walk out of that conversation saying, I hadn't really thought about that. That really makes me think about how I tell my story in a different way. Or maybe I should look into this. They ask me some good questions. That to us is a win for us. And we actually survey all of our organizations to understand how effectively we did at making sure that diligence was an additive and useful process to them. I won't go into all the details about our diligence process, but the only other thing that I'll emphasize is that while we have 5 different investment selection criteria, social entrepreneur, direct impact, systemic change, capacity for growth, and new profit, fit, and value add. I'd say of those 5, social entrepreneur and new profit, fit, and value add are by far the 2 most important. So we are investing in organizations. They're still fairly early stage. You can't just rely upon the innovation itself to be able to scale itself. So you have to rely upon the team and that social entrepreneur in particular to attract all the right kinds of resources and to bring the vision and the thoughtfulness to their entire process so that they can get the organization to where it needs to be. And new profit, fit, and value add, this is a marriage that we're entering into. We look at diligence as dating. And you've got 6 months from dating to marriage. It's not that much time. So we definitely want to make sure that both of us are excited about working with each other. We spend a lot of time together on the other side of it. And if this is in any way painful during diligence, it's going to be far worse once we're married. So I don't know if that's relationship advice.
I can see though, the question of risk always comes up in due diligence, and I think when you combine the fear for me and Simon, the dating from Shruti, and then Maurice's contribution, which has to do with doing things quickly and as quickly as possible, you can see how dangerous this work actually is. Let me introduce our 5 panelists. This is Maurice Mackenbaum from WISE to talk a little bit about how they conduct due diligence and also the relationship and what you think about in terms of your investees or the people you're looking at, what their experience is like and how you reduce the burden on them.
Sure. Yes, in a couple of world WISE philanthropy advisor, we work mostly with individuals and their families, some private foundation also. So we work on grants, investment. That's really the core of our activity. And what we do with them is to help define what they really want to do, is to help in the implementation of their philanthropic program, monitor and report so that they keep informed, and also involve them if they want to in different ways. So most of them travel with us, at least in the field, to visit the grantees, but sometimes there are a higher level of involvement, even in the due diligence process sometimes. I think on due diligence, most of us, here you on this stage, use a number of different criteria where we look at the management and the governance, and we look at the transparency, and thousands of things that we have to look into those organizations that we potentially might channel money to or support to. Reputation is one of the key elements, and it's true, I agree with what Simon said, that things are evolving on how do we assess the reputation, not only of the organization, but of the people. And we know by experience, and we certainly have the same, that it succeeds when you have the right people. People are absolutely key. The structure is just a shell, if you like. It's necessary, it's useful, but people are absolutely key. And as we are connecting our clients, the philanthropists, to organizations, we connect them to people. So our due diligence process is not to find out the best organization in the field, it's the one that fits the best our clients' criteria. Some philanthropists would like to fund the Rolls-Royce, the best organization in a specific field. Others would like to find another profile of organization that have a great potential, but have a potential also to grow and want to help them to move to the next stage and become the Rolls-Royce maybe. So the due diligence is a number of criteria, obviously, but the way you assess criteria is the key element. That's where we are quite tailor-made in that process. I agree that you need to invest time and energy in due diligence, because then if you don't do that well, it's another problem afterwards. So starting with a good due diligence is certainly necessary. In the way our clients get involved, as they are not 100% of the time with the organization or working with them, or they're not sitting on boards of the organization, is a lighter touch. So they delegate some responsibility to us, obviously. So we have some flexibility also in kind of portfolio we'll bring back to them. We like to have a I don't know if it's the right word, a light due diligence process or a speed due diligence process. We don't spend months and months and year. But the truth is, because there are two levels. There's the organizational level, where we see if in the portfolio it will fit our client criteria. And when we have a green light, there is another step, which is the strategic planning of a specific project. We don't manage small grants. We manage grants that are around $300,000, $400,000 minimum to be spent over several years. It can be up to $4 million a year. So it's quite large. So therefore, we will spend time with the organization on the second stage to work with them, to listen to them, see what do they need, how we can support them. And they're very surprised sometimes because they say, well, we need a new accounting software, and you have a limit on administration. We have no limit on nothing. There's no 10% of whatever. What are your needs? And we'll see with the donor, with the philanthropist, if he's interested in helping you in this process. As simple as that. So percentage on administration or staff or whatever doesn't exist with us. Everything is possible at the beginning. And we will help them bringing also skills in strategic planning, tools on how to conduct that, and help them actually develop or frame a specific program to be supported by the philanthropy. So there's two levels. And the second level is very important because it deepens the relationship with those grantees, and we will be with them for several years. So we need to make sure that we have a good relationship, also we understand each other. Maybe just to finish on that, we had a couple of failures in the last almost 10 years that we exist. And usually when we move from the first due diligence process to the strategic planning, most of the time it works well. But sometimes, yes, we have to stop at the end of a very long process or costly process to move in the country, to develop the strategic planning with them and extra. But we see that it won't work, so we have to stop there and move to some other organization.
Okay, right, thank you. So I think you can see, 4 different approaches for 4 very different kinds of organizations. I think the panelists were saying, they also had questions they wanted to pose to the larger group. Does anyone want to kick off with the first question, Audrey?
So I'll never miss an opportunity to have a little focus group. So I have one question for all of you, and that is around behavior change. And as many of us here are funders or portfolio managers, whether for investments or for grants, I would like to get a sense of your reaction to the notion of sharing the due diligence as a process, and your views, because I've brought this up and talk about what we're trying to do to many people, and I've had people from major development banks raise eyebrows and say, what do you mean share due diligence? Development banks, and I thought, development would be an operative word in that phrase, where you're looking at moving money for good to change things for better. But still, I think there's a lot of embedded systemic sort of expectations around how one does this work when it comes to deploying money. So I'd like to ask all of you what your knee-jerk reaction is and where you think the key levers are for influencing a more open approach to due diligence. Anyone?
Hi, I'm Rachel Andrews from the Phil Foundation. To put that in context, we're pretty much a plain vanilla corporate grant maker. So we're not really involved in venture philanthropy, but we do have quite a strong due diligence process. I found that we've actually worked collaboratively with other funders on grants. Mainly worked with our own personal criteria quite narrow. We mainly fund capital and tech projects. We can't actually provide any program funding. So where we found really good opportunities for collaboration is when there's another funder who can only fund program, not capital, and there's a project which requires those elements. But there's a good opportunity for collaborating there. And also possibly where we found projects where another, say, family foundation has funded first phase of the project and they're looking for a funder for phase 2. They're very happy to share their due diligence with us. I think one of the slight issues can be around a lot of grant makers, myself included, have kind of personal targets for the grants that we need to make in a year. So if I made no grants for a year, then I'd probably get fired because I wouldn't be meeting the foundation's objectives. And I think you can run into trouble when there are other grant makers who are maybe easier money than you yourself are. And the risk with necessarily being too open and sharing in every situation is that you can lose out on opportunities to other funders who have less stringent requirements than yourself. And obviously the organisation, maybe they are better to take easier money. But I'm just kind of putting that out there in terms of the mentality of a grant maker. There may be reasons why they might not want to share in every situation.
Right. Vivian first, and then.
In terms of sharing due diligence, the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, we have been asked to share information with other networks like Ashoka and Skoll, and vice versa as well. I think it is helpful to share information, but at the same time, you also have to run the caveat of I conducted this due diligence at this point in time, so by this time that you're asking for the information, it needs to be updated significantly. But the other thing to consider is that there's no real substitute for really kind of being on the ground yourself to conduct that due diligence. I know about high costs, but I think different organizations, depending on their criteria, will look at different things when you're actually on the ground. So I would say, if you can share the information, to bring up those caveats, and at the same time, some of it is also private information that you might have in your application, you might have asked or you might have told the social enterprise that you're being evaluated in this context and your information will not be shared. So I think maybe just clearing that off as well is if you do want to make it kind of like an open source set of information that can be shared in the future, you might list that up front in your application process. Say that we've conducted for our search selection, but you can have the option to check the box if you'd like your information shared with other potential organizations or co-funders.
And please introduce yourself as well.
My name is Aditi and I'm part of Intellicap. I run their angel investment network. So our whole model is based upon co-investments, right? And so in my experience, what I've seen is that for a lot of our investments, we have one sort of leader or deal champion, and then other people will co-invest. And so there's an obvious sort of sharing of due diligence that is happening in that process. But what I've seen is so everybody has a different way of conducting due diligence and a different level of intensity of conducting due diligence. So a lot of times, instead of sharing an actual report that is made or we do share actual documents of the company like audited financials and all of the kind of common stuff. but people are much more comfortable getting on a call with a bunch of other interested co-investors and actually sharing what they felt about the company and their findings in that manner rather than writing a report. A lot of the people that we work with, we don't also employ a third-party due diligence provider because they feel that for small investments, they can just do it themselves. So there's no official report either. So I think sharing in this way, sort of, people are more comfortable with. And the other thing I would say is that if you're sharing due diligence in the same round with other people, then it would make more sense to take the lead approach. So there's a lead or two leads and co-investors, rather than sharing the due diligence and then everybody is making a very independent decision and a very independent result out of that due diligence. Obviously, if you're doing it in separate rounds, like follow on, then that's something different. And in that sense, you have to sort of caveat it by saying, okay, it's been 6 months, and 6 months is a long time for early stage enterprises. They can grow double, triple sometimes in 6 months. So I would say if you're doing it in the same round, maybe share more the findings, rather than the actual due diligence and let everybody else make their own conclusions.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me. I guess one thing I'd add to that is, as a foundation, I think everybody on the stage and probably most people in the room who are providing funding, we have a deep sort of in-your-bones respect for entrepreneurs. And these folks that come to apply for capital from us have often given up a huge whatever it was, a life somewhere else to go do something for social good. There's a huge amount of respect there, and I find it's very tricky to provide negative feedback about that kind of individual. So I'll come and meet somebody who's got a great idea, but we don't get along. And I resonate also with what you're saying on dating, where I can't stand being in the same room with somebody for an hour. But I'm very hesitant to share that information because I've had many classic examples where I've had a profound reaction against somebody, and then some other investor who I respect a lot has gone on and had a totally different reaction and invested in that business and made a success of it. And I would have hated to have been influencing that other person's totally different perception on the same facts. And again, this is perhaps unique to us, where we're looking at enterprises that are at that blueprint stage, where there isn't that much factual information. A lot of it is qualitative interpretation and bringing our own experience to the table. So I guess the question for you, Audrey, is how do you, when you think about your platform to share intelligence, how do you deal with qualitative information and avoiding those different perceptions on the same individual?
That was one of the, so just really quick, that was one, so just to clarify one thing, we're into sharing, but it's not kumbaya around a campfire. There's a lead investor, and that lead investor decides to share with maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 others that they pick. Because once you signal interest in a deal, it's yours to lead, and then you can determine from there. So it's not like wide open, opt-in, and whole row. So there is a little bit of selection in that process. The last thing you want to do is to doom an entrepreneur. And the fact that we all have varying appetites for risk can certainly create a situation where there's a lot of willingness, especially when we're among, first many of us are friends and know each other now for many years. So there's a lot of willingness to follow each other's opinion or views on something, but be very careful not to create a system that institutionalizes a personal bias.
Right.
And so that qualitative piece, system can only just be a repository and a social network for signaling interest in something. But all that qualitative stuff has to happen offline. It's going to happen anyway, one could think. But the objective is very much to retain neutrality while simply reducing, increasing efficiency and reducing costs. That doesn't really answer things directly, but I think you've hit exactly on the most important piece.
Yeah, just to mention a little bit, Simon, you talked about the importance of sort of the interpersonal chemistry. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not there, but we should recognize that also plays a role in how people make decisions. And then of course, different groups will have different criteria, and they'll make their decisions, accordingly. So I have another question for everyone here in the room, and it's a question about criteria. And let me try to frame it this way and see if it works. This is another show of hands type question. If you feel that in the work that you do in due diligence, if you feel that you're satisfied with the criteria that you use, not just satisfied, but you're very, very confident that the criteria that you develop and the criteria that you deploy are very well aligned with your vision and are producing the results that you want to see, and you're very confident, raise your hand. So there are going to be a couple more options, so just to let you know. So if you're very confident in your criteria, how do you feel? Anyone? Yes.
We hear the choices up front.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Fair enough. The next would be you feel that you're sort of knee deep in a criteria development process, and you're going through trial and error. You're trying to figure it out. Maybe you've sort of been through a couple of iterations, and you kind of feel like you're refining your criteria. And I suppose the last option would be you're in the position that everyone is in at one point or another, which is just trying to figure out what kind of criteria makes sense, or maybe, or maybe just having gone through an experience of realizing that your criteria might not be serving the purpose that you want, and you really feel like that's a big struggle. So, confident in criteria, hands up. Somewhat confident, but a lot of work to do. Okay. And really feeling that you're at the beginning of the journey and there's a lot to do there. Okay. These are the really honest people in the room. It's good. So I want to invite everyone, no matter which of these descriptions you chose for yourself, if anyone would like to share their experience in how you developed your criteria and what you learned in the process of developing criteria, we'd love to hear about these experiences. Yeah, please.
I would say I run an organization called Village Capital. We make early stage investments. We've made about 30 in the last 4 years. And so short answer is trial and error. We see the ones that have gone wrong and try not to do that again. It's a bit of a flippant answer, but I would say at the early stage at least, I think that you can't, if I look at our portfolio, the ones that are doing really well, I don't think we could have predicted the thing that happened to make them do really well. It was usually met the right customer at the right time and just took off. I think that we have seen pretty consistent risks around the companies that have failed have had similar stories, and so I think our criteria is much more around risk mitigation than it is trying to predict what's going to make this successful.
Actually, Ross, can you take a step further, because you've taken this diligence process, which I think is very, very relevant to this discussion, where we all think as funders or as advisors, we know best about what decisions to make, but you've sort of democratized that and said, actually, the investor or the foundation isn't the best person, and in many cases, the entrepreneur is are better at selecting which other entrepreneurs ought to be funded than an investor would be. So what have you found in terms of outcomes there? Just to turn
we have an unusual investment model. We do our investment through peer selection of groups of entrepreneurs, and I think that we found that the diligence process itself was bad for company building, the way it's traditionally done, because we found a lot of entrepreneurs would build companies with the funder as customer, saying, oh, people like last mile distribution in Asia, so I'm going to build a last mile distribution company because I think that's what people fund, and I'm going to add these things because I know that people have their diligence checklists, and if I have this, people will fund it. And so we have investors, and there aren't very many who will do this, but we have investors pre-commit capital to groups of entrepreneurs, and we build our investment criteria around team risk, team retention and building beyond the inspirational founder, customer risk, like do you have lots of evidence that people like what you're selling, etc. Things that are, but we have entrepreneurs pitching each other in part because it's, I would say in most part because then we find that they focus more on the risks that we see consistently happening and convincing each other that they've overcome that risk rather than trying to convince the rich person that I am doing what you have said you like to fund.
Exactly. Very cool.
I just want to say one thing. There was this one organization that kept coming back to us, and very interesting team, and they were working in the renewable energy field. And every time I asked, okay, so what's your target? What's your investment requirement? the response was, well, how much are you ready to give us? And it's like saying, you know, what's your name? What do you want it to be? And so it just went on and on. And it's that, it just touched on that and reminds me of the importance of that clarity when it comes to the approach. It's just, yeah.
One quick point, not exactly on the criteria, but actually on the timing of the due diligence. So traditionally how it's done is lots of people will do it after the term sheet stage, right? Or you're dating the term sheet and then you do the due diligence. What we've seen is a lot of new entrepreneurs, especially who are raising money for the first time, freeze up when the due diligence happens in that way. And a lot of times I've been on the field and I know these entrepreneurs for a while, and they're very relaxed people, but in front of the investor, and especially if the investor is somebody who's they're not able to speak the same language and things like that, they really freeze up, and they're different people. And then the whole personality question comes in. The investor starts to feel that these guys are not comfortable in front of us, maybe they're hiding something, what are they scared about? And they're just scared about they just freeze up because they're being tested. So I think one of the things to think about for early stage investing is maybe make the due diligence a part of the get to know you process and do as much as you can before. Because at that time, they want to show you everything, they really open up and let you in. And then when you sort of are at a point when you're evaluating a term sheet or something, then the whole process after that can even be faster. Because you've already researched and the terms incorporate your findings beforehand.
So just we'll move on. I see a couple of other hands, but I just want to make sure that a couple of the points that came up here get underscored. From Ross, I think one of the key points is some sort of peer process in which entrepreneurs are helping to make decisions about other entrepreneurs, right? I mean, we all put sort of entrepreneurs up on a pedestal and say they're different from everyone else. They think differently, they act differently, they change the world, they do all of this, which raises the question, well, then who are the best people to really understand entrepreneurs, right? Maybe it's other entrepreneurs. So that kind of open process seems to be, one of the nuggets of wisdom that's in the sector. And another is, about relationship building. And I think what you're saying is, is it possible, or is it very valuable to have a relationship building process which isn't so explicitly linked to a particular financial transaction at the beginning, right? It's the getting to know you process, and of course sooner or later, the money comes into it, but maybe the organization conducting the due diligence has to first form a pretty strong opinion and relationship, and then start really looking at the term sheet, that kind of thing. Okay. Jim, I think you had a
yes, I worked as a consultant for an organization for a time, and a couple of the things that we did in our due diligence process was that we got them to give us a list of people that would give a good recommendation for them. Now, we looked for people that we already had relationship with, or we would begin to search for people that we had relationship with that had relationship with this other party. So we did a lot of checking from different directions. Another thing that we did that was different from what some people did was that we looked at the team on the ground, because we dealt with international organizations. We had people from various foreigners who were going to go in to help start something. We looked at, first of all, that the person that was in charge, if they had experience in that country and in that field in that country. Also the team, how many indigenous people were part of it, because sustainability was one of the factors that we looked at. And so that was looking at the team that was working with the entrepreneur, finding out how much experience they actually had in that area. We didn't take a lot of high risk, with people, but the sustainability part, by getting people on the ground that were part of their team that was going to be able to carry on in case something happened and that foreigner had to leave.
If I can just make a comment, because I experienced something quite different. The wrap-up or your comment, Ross, is something that we do not see. Maybe because we're more into grants than investment, I don't know. But most of our clients are very successful entrepreneurs. But when it comes to philanthropy, they're not rational at all. The way they make decisions is quite surprising. So it is challenging for us sometimes to kind of bring some basic criteria and say, well, but look at that, and think, yeah, well, maybe it's costly, but I mean, there's no price to save a kid's life. Sure, but you can save some more. I don't know. So you enter in a discussion where it's very difficult to move between your rational and objective criteria, where you add some subjective as far as relationship, and the way suddenly they think, which is quite different than when they manage their business, because I guess, I hope, I imagine, if they're so successful and make so many millions, because the brain functions quite well, but it's like there is a switch. Philanthropy is something different, and very often they don't think the same way. That's what we experience.
Yes, please.
I have a question for the panel and the group. So when we do, I work with Dasra in India, and when we do due diligence on non-profits, again, it's similar to your model. Is sort of a 6-month research-based engagement, spend a lot of time with the organization, look at the team, and so on and on. And it's a very intense process. It takes a lot of time. And we also want people to benefit from the due diligence process, just like you said. And what we are looking at switching over to now is actually doing workshops. And our due diligence is sector-based, so it's usually 10 to 15 organizations from a certain sector. And actually looking at doing like a 6-day workshop with them, and we can add value to them. We get to spend 6 days with them as a team, get to see how they interact with each other and do much more reference checks. And also almost create an event out of it, so you can bring donors, funders, other organizations to the group who are interested in the sector. And one of the questions we're grappling with right now as we roll this out is how transparent and honest will people be when they're in a collective group in the same place, and they know that only one of them is going to get funding at the end of it. And has anyone had experience with this sort of thing? I know, with Village Capital we ran it, but there were organizations from different sectors and so on. But any thoughts or experience around this sort of model?
We haven't done it exactly that way just for diligence, but we've had, we actually take a very deep look at how organizations that are in our pipeline interact with other organizations in group settings. So we have a conference that we do every year. We intentionally invite pipeline members to our conference because we want to see how are they going to be in that kind of setting. Are they going to be the innovators, the ones who are generating new ideas? Are they going to walk away saying, gosh, this has really made me think about my model and I want to shift this, that, and the other? Or are they going to be the flies on the wall, the wallpaper, as people put it, where they're not actually contributing at all to the conversation, or they're grandstanding, and all they're trying to do in the entire time is talk about how great they are and how much, and try to get more money out of the event. But we're very intentional about not doing just pipeline only conversations. We want this to be in a broader context so that you get a little bit more of a natural setting.
I guess one thing I'd add is just this whole thing on the time it takes to conduct this diligence process. And there are some famous examples of big DFIs who have huge budgets, supposedly for seed stage enterprises, and they're like, well, that's great. How long does it take for an entrepreneur to get through that? Because I've got some partners who might benefit. And they're like, well, money out the door in 12 to 14 months. And it's like, if you're a seed stage enterprise, that's a lifetime. That's nuts. If you're in that space of providing early stage at the blueprint or even early validate period, and you're taking more than half a year to take a decision, and you're having to force people to come to events and put them through a process where they could be running their business. I would take objection to that just in general. Are you serving the company? Are they benefiting from that, or are you just taking their time? I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but I mean, we do see examples where it is not additive.
On the same thing. That's also an observation that we do, because all due diligence do not end up in a happy ending. That's a fact. Sure. So there are a few organizations who said, well, they don't want to engage with some VP funds or impact investing fund because they know that it's a very heavy process and the probability that they get any support is very low. So they just don't want to engage. So I wonder if you have the same experience where people say, no, we don't want even to start the due diligence process with you, or on the opposite, if you who are subject of due diligence, unless not with those guys, I don't need names, but if it happens to you not with those guys because we know it's just too heavy, and what are the things that are absolutely too much for due diligence?
I think a fair litmus. I think a fair litmus test is, when you go to these various conferences and you see somebody that you due diligence and you're ducking, that's probably a fair indication of whether or not you've done right by that entrepreneur. And I think I can say that because we've all had the experience of not having done right by the entrepreneur. And there's a couple of cases. There's one in particular that I'll never forget of an incredibly inspiring entrepreneur who basically went under because 3 investors, ourselves included, couldn't sort it out. And because we couldn't sort it out, she ran out of the capital needed to keep the lights on, and had put a lot of other things on hold in the process. So this is like a total life shift for somebody who gave up a lot to go and run a business in Hyderabad in this case. So there's these examples, and I think I guess to a certain extent this supports a little bit our premise that if several of us can club together and kind of create that process once or maybe twice, and obviously update it and keep it up to date, then maybe it's a little better than having these. I've seen some of these entrepreneurs spend 18 months straight, 24 months straight, just dancing, doing the dance in front of various funders and not having anything happen at the end. And maybe that's for good reason, because they're not ready for it, or they don't have the absorptive capacity, and not every business is worth funding, depending on what your criteria are. But there are better ways to do this. So.
The one thing I'd add on this is, rightly or wrongly, we've had many organizations, so we've been around for 15 years, we've had many organizations that have been in our pipeline for 7 to 9 years before they actually make it into the new profit portfolio. In fact, I have 2 deals that one was in the pipeline for 8 years, the other one's in the pipeline for 11 years. So I managed to get 2 deals that have had a rich long-term experience with new profit prior to me sitting on their board. And what I'll say about that is, there are definitely mistakes that we've made in the earlier years on this. Now we won't actually start the diligence process unless we think that it really is the right time for an organization. So we have this pipeline process, we have a screening process. By the time we're actually going into diligence, we've got to have a pretty high confidence, and diligence is actually more about working out the building the relationship, so it's the dating to marriage piece, and working out the details of how we're going to work together. There might be some red flags that come up, but I would say more often than not, we've tried to sort through that with lighter touch conversations. So it's a semantics thing. It's all the diligence process, you could say, but they don't enter quote diligence until they get a little bit further along.
Right. That's a good point, and it does raise the issue that we've managed, in keeping with the theme of the conference, we've managed to skirt sort of the definition, what actually counts as due diligence, right? And what doesn't, we talk about relationship building and getting to know people and pipeline, right? Which is very much how Ashoka works as well. I mean, we've had people in the pipeline for several years before we thought they were ready, or before, conditions were right. Or before sometimes they can meet some of our criteria. One of our stories from Nepal from the 1980s was that, in those days our founder did all the interviews of new Ashoka Fellows himself, and he met a very interesting social entrepreneur, a woman who was building up rural women's organizations, I believe, and he loved her work. He thought she was great. He was really impressed, but we have one of our criteria is that you have to be working full time on this area, and she was attached to a university. And so the first time she sort of came through the process, and he interviewed her and said, okay, well, are you ready to go full time? She said, I'm not ready. He said, okay. So the next year he went back and he met her again and said, okay, nice to hear the updates on your work. Are you ready to go through the process? Are you ready to step out of the university and work full time? And she said, no. He said, okay, we can't move forward. And the staff are debating and saying, no, we should make an exception, the whole thing. And this went on for several years, and then he went back and met her again and said, okay, are you ready to go full time? She said, okay, now I'm ready. And then she became an Ashoka Fellow, right? So, keeping people in the pipeline for a long time isn't necessarily a sign of inefficiency or lack of respect, and taking too much of their time. It's sometimes necessary because of what you're trying to achieve in terms of criteria. and I just want, I think we're running out of time here, but I just wanted to respond briefly to the input from Dasra, because I think that process of bringing social entrepreneurs together to in a workshop format or something like a workshop format is actually extremely valuable at a field building level, right? And this is something that we're also involved in. We do it, at different stages. But I think part of the field here, part of the effort here is to build the culture of social entrepreneurship, right? And so having social entrepreneurs meet each other, people who are working in different fields, right? They may consider that they're competing for the same funds. They may not be considered that they're competing for the same funds. But giving them the opportunity to meet like-minded social entrepreneurs, maybe people they've never met before because they work in different sectors. How well do the water and sanitation people know the education people in your country, right? That's a really good benefit you can bring to the field if you can create a space to gather people together. And then, of course, as you say, it does give you an opportunity to observe how people behave in groups other than just sort of sitting across the table answering interview questions. I'll just share from Ashoka's notebook. One of our techniques, or at least one of my techniques. Of course, not only do we interview people, but then we also go and visit them in their offices and meet the team. And one of the things that we find is very useful to do is to basically, at a point in the interview when you have to start ignoring the candidate and start talking to the staff, right? Without kind of asking permission, and then see what the reaction is, right? Are you looking at a leader who's very comfortable and very proud to have the staff represent the organization and talk about what they're doing? Or do you find someone who jumps in and says, oh, whoa, I don't want the second in charge saying too much because, I'm in charge of controlling it. And these are sort of little techniques, that you learn in the due diligence process to get around some of the qualitative issues.
Do you do that after they have 4 beers and then?
Another form of due diligence. Actually, we do that more with staff, actually. Staff candidates. The Bureau is helps. How are we doing on time? Time's up. Okay, you're so polite. I shouldn't have asked. We could have kept going. Okay. Why don't we just get a final word for each of the panelists? By which I mean a word. So I'm going to ask each of you to try to sum up either what you see as the value of due diligence, or the challenge of due diligence, or your experience with in a single word. And Shruti, you're laughing first, so you speak first.
Enriching.
Okay.
Should be enriching.
All right, Maurice.
I would say compulsory.
Compulsory. Oh, okay. Right. Simon.
Yeah, value add. To follow you up.
Value add is what you said.
That's 2 words.
Okay. We hyphen.
It's a hyphen.
Do we vote? Do we approve the hyphen? Not really. Okay. Sorry.
Don't pass.
Next year. We'll bring you back next year.
I live in Switzerland now, so efficiency.
And I suppose if I were to give my word, of course I haven't thought about this. I always do this. I ask people questions and realize that it's my turn. I don't know the answer. I would have to say it has to be somehow uplifting. The conversations that we engage people in. Now, of course, I'm explaining my word, which is unfair, but
I got heck for 2 words.
This is the moderator's privilege. I'm invoking the moderator. Yeah, the closing comments. That's right. It was basically, what we strive to do, and I'm not claiming that at Ashoka we achieve this all the time, but what we strive to do is to make sure that the process itself is valuable to the person we're talking to, regardless of the outcome. Because the outcome can't always be the desired outcome for the person, but we try to make sure that we ask questions that no one else has asked, that we listen, and we position ourselves as as people who are willing to take the time to look at the world from their point of view and understand what their actual vision for social change is, and where it's going, and we don't sort of just hit them over the head with our criteria, but we really try to understand where they are, and then at least we learn a lot and they learn a lot with the process. Hopefully there's a deal at the end, but if not, we try to do no harm. So we've run out of time, we've run over time, but thank you so much for not only for coming, but for participating. We really appreciate the input, and looking forward to interacting with you all through the rest of the conference. So thanks very much. Let's do it.